Hello,
Hi.
this is Misty Luminais. This is for the Social Justice Institute's Voicing in Action project. We're here today with Jacqueline Gillon. It's May 21st, 2013. We wanted to say thank you so much for doing this interview with us. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So we're going to start with something really broad. Can you tell me about yourself and the history of your family?
Wow. I am the oldest of four children of George and Alberta Gillon. My dad, George Gillon, is deceased. He passed away in 1984. My mom is still living. She's 80 years old now, and she's living in assisted living at Homewood in Homewood Rockefeller Gardens in Cleveland Heights. My parents both worked for Fisher Body. My dad was at the Euclid plant and my mother was at the Coit Road plant. When my parents married, they moved into the Glenville community, and there they resided until 1966, and we moved into a house in East Cleveland on 135th Street between Woodworth and Mann Avenue.
And what year were you born in?
I was born June 15th, 1956. I will be 57 years old next month.
So where are your grandparents from?
I never knew my grandparents, but my mom's folks are from North Carolina. My dad's folks, my dad was born in Birmingham, Alabama. His father migrated throughout the South and ended up in Cleveland in the late 40s. They spent some time in Alabama, West Virginia, and eventually landed in Cleveland. My dad went to East Tech until he went into the Army, and he served in the armed services. My mother and my father met at Jack's Bar on Cedar Avenue in the mid 50s. I believe it was 1950. So they got married in 55, and I believe they met in 1954. And I love to hear stories about those times because the Fairfax community was very lively. There was lots of entertainment, and my mother, who left Charlotte, North Carolina, and moved to Cleveland, I believe she was about 21 after she finished junior college, was very excited about being in Cleveland. She and my dad would go have tea, they would go dance. In fact, she told me about the night that she met my father and how she was hanging out with her girlfriends, typical early 20s, and she resisted his charms for a while, but eventually they dated and got married in 1955.
And so both of them were new to Cleveland when that happened?
I think probably, relatively speaking, my mother was probably newer to Cleveland than my dad. My dad got here, but then he left and joined the Army, and then he came back to Cleveland. His father passed away, I believe, in 1953. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, my dad was, he was here a little bit longer.
So they didn't have kind of the traditional parents kind of chaperoning their courtship?
Oh no, no. Both my parents lost their parents. My dad didn't have his mom, and my mother didn't have her mom. My mother's father lived in Newburgh, New York, and I did get a chance to see him once. I believe I was a junior or senior in high school. We went up to Newburgh, and my dad's dad passed away at 53, and he never knew his mom either. So I had aunts and uncles and cousins, but the Gillon crew, we were pretty much self-contained. We saw family members on both sides, but it was clear that we were family. And we went south to visit, and we went to New Jersey. We went south to visit mainly my mother's people. Um, and then later went to West Virginia to see my dad's sister. My dad's other sister, she lived in New Jersey for a number of years, so that was quite interesting in the 60s to travel to New York, New Jersey, because that city was on fire. There was always something going on. And Cleveland was a lot more sedate than Newark, New Jersey back in the 60s. But I have very clear memories of the civil rights movement and things that were going on in Cleveland. Before we moved to East Cleveland in 66, African Americans boycotted the Cleveland school system. And the strategy, the families sent their children to community centers and churches. And we had a day of learning about Black history and learning more about ourselves because of the conditions with the school system. I also can remember when there was a protest about building Stephen E. Howe, another school, because we're segregated. So another school in the Black community on Lakeview, and this one pastor, he was knocked down by a bulldozer and was killed. So those were very clear times. I remember when President Kennedy was assassinated at 63. I remember when a lady got drunk, got in her car, and ran over a number of children when we were still living in Glenville. So my childhood is pretty vivid for me. The whole notion of knowing about street clubs. My dad was a precinct committeeman. My mother was active with the PTA. We went to church. So there was a lot of order. There were some things we weren't allowed to listen to on the radio. My dad preferred for us to listen to jazz or some gospel, but we knew the top 40. When we would ride in the car, we knew where there were places where you were not allowed to go because you were Black. And they tried to soften the blow of that because we didn't quite understand that, but they let us know what the situation was. And this was during the 60s.
So how did your parents try to soften that blow?
They said that this is somewhere we can't really go, but these are the places we can go. So there was always this option, and it wasn't like you were missing anything. It was just the fact that you couldn't go. I also remember being in Kroger's when we were little bitty kids in Glenville and seeing families in the grocery store and watching TV and not really recognizing that I was Black. I just thought I looked like who I saw in the grocery store because you never saw yourself anywhere, so you just thought everybody looked the same. So that was an awakening. That was an awakening. And then watching on television how the dogs were going after people fighting in the civil rights movement. And I remember standing in front of that television and saying, you know what, I'm always going to help my people. I'm always going to be committed to that. And again, that the whole notion of having those images in your face and being able to connect. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned something about living in Glenville. Were you living there during the Glenville riots, and what year was that?
We moved from Glenville in 1966. Actually, the Huff riots were going on the year that we moved. I remember seeing the tanks, and the tanks were right up and down the streets because it just wasn't Huff, which was next door to us, but it was the entire area that was inundated with troops and tanks and that kind of thing. In '68, when the Glenville riots happened, we were living in East Cleveland. But because the riots started at Auburndale, East Cleveland, that's the border between Glenville and East Cleveland. You guys know that University Circle, that there was also some exposure for East Clevelanders to what was going on with law enforcement and the violence. So.
And how did those riots affect you?
I knew that it was serious. I knew that things had to change. I knew we had a black mayor. And I also remember Ralph Locher. Now, Ralph Locher was the mayor of Cleveland. We were still living in Glenville, and there was an essay contest. And the essay contest, you had to respond to the question, what good citizenship means to me. And even then, I had this sense of leadership and citizenship and involvement. So I remember writing that essay, and Ralph Locher came to Charles H. Lake. That's where I went to elementary school in Cleveland. When we moved to East Cleveland, I went to Chambers Elementary School. And I remember this conversation that my mom had about, was I ready to go into the 5th grade? Because when you left Cleveland schools, it was thought that you had to be put behind. And many folks were put behind a grade because they were moving from Cleveland to East Cleveland. But that wasn't the case with me, fortunately. And it was late in the school year, so I was a 4th grader in April, and did the rest of that term and went on to the 5th grade. So how do I remember these things? I do not know. It's amazing.
So how did you feel about the police being in your neighborhood? How do you feel about the military? You were a young girl.
It was surreal. It was like watching TV on your street. That's what it was like. It's like, oh. I remember the fatigues. I remember they were all white guys. And I remember the trucks. And I remember this was a huge time of change. And hearing King on television and hearing Malcolm X's name and the conversations that my parents would have. We were a family that we didn't just have dinner, we had a meeting. So they would talk to us about what was going on and about the importance of staying in school and doing well in school, and the racial tensions at work and the conversations that were going on in the workplace. And my father, who was the first black superintendent at the Euclid plant, talking about how he had that position, but he never anticipated moving up. It was just a good thing that he got what he got. So, but it got us to East Cleveland. They were able to buy their first home and that kind of thing.
And that was at Fisher Body?
Fisher Body Euclid. Mm-hmm.
And how was your neighborhood in Glenville growing up? Was it mixed? Was it predominantly African American?
It was African American, but because right down the street off of St. Clair, there were still a lot of ethnic folks living in the neighborhood. So we saw people at Kroger's, at the grocery store, and then because my father's workplace was integrated, and we went to union activities, the Christmas party, or if there was a layoff, they always gave food to the families, we would see white kids. And during the summertime, when there would be a picnic, we would see white kids then too. But our particular neighborhood was black.
When you would go visit family in the South, were things very different? Like as far as segregation racially?
I don't remember seeing any white folks. And in Charlotte, we were either at my aunt's house in the city or at our aunt and uncle's house out in the country. We heard references to who my aunt worked for, but we never really we saw very few white folks. the whole issue around race, I don't remember it ever being a part of the conversation. I just remember that black folks did well right in their neighborhoods, and that's what we had in Glenville. You saw everybody driving nice cars or not a car, so all the socio-economic levels were right there in the neighborhood, and that's what I saw in the South too.
Okay, now in the Glenville area, and what you saw as far as your father was working in Fisher Body, and I'd like to say Fisher Body was a division of General Motors.
Correct.
Where they supplied body parts.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, a lot of people around your family, there was the African Americans, but they were working in similar occupations, like in Fisher Body or something similar to that, steel mill. So that kind of set you on a upper level.
The only difference that we saw, there was one family, the Gaines family. Now, the mother was German and the father was black. And he had his own detergent. He used to sell bleach and detergent out of his truck. And we went to school with the boys. So we saw that. I do remember, and it was kind of sad, but we were conscious of who got a check, who was on the relief. We were conscious of that. And we knew when it was coming, but the majority of us really knew our parents had jobs and they worked doing something. So.
Now, you had mentioned something about you knew what places not to go. Could you give me an idea on some of those places and why you were told not to go in those communities?
This was mainly when we would pile in the car for a ride. And my dad, because he worked out in Euclid, that was always a choice place to ride to. And we would point out certain places and was told, oh, we want to go there. No, you really can't go there right now. That's how they would put it. So it was out east, and I wish I could remember in particular. We did go to Euclid Beach. We did experience that. But there were other places and things that we were told we couldn't do.
How about Murray Hill?
Now, Murray Hill, that was all hearsay. When I got older, you definitely didn't come over there. Not at all. And there were the newspaper reports about killings and things happening to black people that ventured over into Little Italy. Yeah, that was clear. In fact, I can remember some years ago, I was working with Neighborhood Centers Association, and one of the directors, he wouldn't come to a meeting at Alta House. And Alta House is right there on Mayfield in Little Italy because of the memory of what happened.
And he was African American?
In fact, he just passed away, Willie Starkey. He's like, I understand what you all saying, I can't make myself go over there. In fact, with Neighborhood Leadership Cleveland Class 9, one of the participants, she was really upset about that whole conversation about Little Italy. So we went as a group, about 12 of us, to have dinner. We sat outside, and people rode by and they looked, because this was still the 90s. They looked, it was a little curious for this integrated group of folks. We went in the restaurant and had a great dinner, and then we walked to the bakery. They had good donuts and got donuts, and that was interesting. But it was still this sense about there were certain neighborhoods we lived and they lived. The suburbs, the further out east you went, we had no knowledge about the west side at all. We would go to Central Market, and that's where we would see all kinds of people there too. But those were common areas like the grocery store. So.
Now, and then there was East Cleveland, which in Glenville you lived right beside East Cleveland.
Correct.
So what did you think about East Cleveland at that time?
It was funny. I can remember there was a corner store that we used to always go, Tate's. And the Tates would always give us a little something, and my dad would talk to the owner. Oh, you all moving to the Heights. That's what they called it, the Heights. We're like, we're not moving to the Heights. We're moving to East Cleveland. But we moved there, and we knew there were 42 houses on the street, and we were the 7th black family on the street. And it was very, very strange. And when I got to Chambers, and there were all these white kids, and they were looking at me so funny. I was like, okay, but they were friendly. And I remember this one little girl, Debbie Riley, she lived near the playground. And we were out on the playground, and I had to go to the bathroom. And her mom said I couldn't.
And how old were you?
I was probably 4th grade, 5th grade, so I was no more older than 9 or 10.
Did you understand why?
Yeah. We walked from our house on 135th to Chambers, and we would walk down Man to Woodworth, and when we got to Man before you get to Hayden, they were throwing rocks at us and calling us niggas. Yeah.
And this was like 68?
This was 66.
66.
We moved to East Cleveland in 66.
So before we get any further into East Cleveland, I want to learn a little bit more about Glenville.
Yes.
What did your neighborhood look like in Glenville?
That's so nice. It was nice. It was green. It was clean. Neighborly. The park was at the end of that street, and it was kind of dusty. It wasn't. It was the grass, and it was the dirt. So now, of course, it's all asphalted and that kind of thing. But I just remember it just being clean and green. Just what I remember, and order, and just the friendliness, and going to Gordon Park in the summertime. And my dad was a tennis player, so we watched him play tennis, or watch a baseball game, go to the aquarium. Those were good years. In the 4th grade, we had the opportunity to get a garden. So I had my own now those a little bit older than me, they call them victory gardens. They didn't call our gardens victory gardens. But nonetheless, we each had our own little plot, and I was a little sad because I thought I wasn't going to be able to keep my garden because we were moving. So there was an agreement that I can keep it, but I would have to catch the bus to tend my garden. So I would walk to St. Clair and get the one to go home to East Cleveland and go back and forth. But learning how, when it rained, how to do flower arrangements, it was good stuff. And remember the first time something came out the ground that I grew, and the disappointment when stuff didn't come up. And you're standing there looking like, what happened? Yes, that was real clear. And then the things that came up, the tomatoes and the lettuce, oh my goodness. We would get a basket and fill that basket up, and I dragged that basket up East Boulevard to St. Clair and got on the bus and came home. And it was fine. I didn't feel afraid, threatened, none of that, because it was a sense of safety and community. The only scariest part was when I mentioned before about that accident when the lady hit all those kids. And one of the kids that survived the accident was Carlton Garner. And Carlton and I are friends to this day. Carlton's leg was broken. He had some other injuries too, but I can remember the day he came back to school on crutches. That was scary. And remembering Kennedy's assassination and all the violence all over the country and seeing things on TV and my dad explaining things to us. And yeah.
So was that the woman who hit the children, was that racially motivated?
No.
No, it was just a violence.
It was a lady that lived in the neighborhood in Glenville. And she had kids that went to the school. I think she had an accident. And ended up the car, I think she was driving a Cadillac, and the car ran up on the sidewalk. And one family, the Williams family, they were particularly devastated because they lost several children in the family. And my friend Rhonda, she could not speak. She just lost her sense of speech for a while because, you see, that made me nervous to even think about that. Because she was traumatized. So, yeah. And it was in the newspaper and that kind of thing. Yeah.
So who were your friends?
The Bats girls, and they lived on 91st. And Vivian lived down the street. Vivian was older than me, but she would come and get me to walk me to school. I just saw her Sunday. So the one thing I could say about those relationships, you don't lose them. If you are able to reconnect, that sense of connection is there. And it's like you really don't miss a beat. So I have one friend, I'm so amazed about this. And we are very close friends now. I met him professionally in 1984. But what I didn't know, and we just discovered 4 years ago, is that his babysitter was my mom's friend. And we started comparing notes. We discovered that we had those same friends. He was in my kindergarten class at Charles H. Lake. And I can't even describe what that feels like. And my friend Rhonda, from elementary school, when you get in your 50s and you're able to talk about people you knew when you were 5 years old, that's amazing. Yeah.
All right, just one more thing before we move on to East Cleveland.
Sure.
What does your family look like now?
As compared to then?
Well, just do you have children? Do you have...
Oh, no, I don't have children. I've never been married. I hope to, before I leave this side, that I'll marry. I have three nieces, and a nephew. My brother married a lady who had a daughter, and then they had a daughter together. And that older girl, she has 3 little kids that are like great nieces and nephews for me. So, but I will say, even though I didn't have my own children are attracted to me. And all my friends have children. So I'm Miss Jackie or Aunt Jackie. And, it happened so quickly because my life was so busy. When I looked around after I left East Cleveland City Council, it's like, I was 38. I was like, oops, I gotta do something. And then it didn't happen. So I guess you could say a regret is that I didn't have, when I was busy doing politics and community stuff, that I didn't form that relationship that would have yielded children and a family of my own.
Well, you talked a little bit earlier about your impulse towards leadership at a really young age. Were you always involved in the arts and leadership at a young age?
Yeah. The skits in 2nd grade and wanting to take a leadership role in the classroom and writing. It's always with me. It's kind of, I already kind of knew who I was. So, yes. Yeah, that was a discovery of your purpose at a very young age. Um, I learned how to play the violin too in the 5th grade, and I wasn't very good at it. When I got to Kirk in East Cleveland, I played in the orchestra in the 7th and 8th grade. And you know, that's pretty rough. Little chubby girl carrying that violin case back and forth to school. You know, I got teased a lot. But I loved being around the music. And again, one friend in particular, Dare Waters, I met him when I was in the 6th grade because I joined the all city orchestra. And Daryl is now a Grammy award winner. He's just wonderful. He's played with a lot of folks. He was Eartha Kitt's personal pianist until she died. So, you know, when you grow up with folks who are just so gifted and talented, it's nice. It's nice. So, some of us had kids, some of us didn't. You know, the children of the 70s, for the women, it appeared that it took us longer to get married. Some of us had kids out of wedlock. The men married didn't stay married long. It's just a kind of a weird bag. I think some of it really had to do with economics. That black people are not really, maybe it's a people thing, I don't know. But I knew my folks, if they didn't have a job or stability, they didn't want to get married. And during that time, it was free-spirited. So folks lived together. You know, I did. I have to admit, I lived with a guy for a number of years, but we didn't marry. Back then, they called it common law marriage. But that wasn't unusual. And it wasn't the way I was brought up, you know, as a Christian, but it was a reality of life. There were lots of people who lived together, but never married. So, yeah. And had babies. And if there became an illness or something life-threatening, they went and got married. Yeah, I've seen that a lot. Yeah. So
how old were you when you lived with your partner?
we were, let's see, we're 3 years apart. What was I? 30. See, I got elected in 87. When did we move in together? I probably was about 33. Yeah, I was about 33 because I can remember we split when I was 38. And that's when I really hit the panic button. It's like, oh, am I going to get married? Oh my goodness. Yeah, we lived together 5 years.
How did your parents feel about that? You had already lost your dad, but your mom.
Yeah, I lost my dad. Oh, my mother hated that. It was an embarrassment. You don't do that. But I did, and it strained relationships in the family. His family accepted and supported me, but my family didn't like it at all. It was not a good thing. In fact, I had a difficult time coming to church because of the guilt. You just didn't do that. You know, especially if you called yourself a believer. You know, it's not what God would have you to do. But it was a convenience, and we both were going through a lot. I was on city council. So you can imagine, in my first year on city council, it was all women. So they were always trying to figure out, Jackie, we'll pay for the reception if you get married. But it didn't happen. So, yeah.
Alright, so now we're going to start talking about East Cleveland specifically. Can you think back to your earliest memories of East Cleveland and tell me what life was like then?
It was more of the same, more of the cleanness, the order. People really loved East Cleveland. They had bumper stickers that said, "We live in East Cleveland and we like it." There were community organizations that popped up to support families like mine that were integrating East Cleveland. What we didn't understand was that there was a lot of intention around moving white people out of East Cleveland and black people in. And it was the real estate community. They were responsible. We didn't know that. So it went quickly. It turned over quickly. The families were moving like left and right. We looked around one day and a lot of black families that moved on the street and the white families were gone. And I can remember a conversation my dad would have at work, because he always talked about everything at the dining room table. We talked about everything. We did spelling tests, we talked about school, we talked about work, we told jokes, everything happened at the dining room table. But he talked about how the white families felt pressured to move because you don't want to live next door to black people. It's okay to work with them, but you don't want to live next door to them. And some of them moved and they couldn't afford to move. They moved to places like Mineral on the Lake and couldn't afford to do it, but they felt they had to. It was sad. It was just a really, really nice place to live. Everybody took care of their yard. Everybody had a new car. Everybody compared notes. We had a really wonderful street club. In fact, it was so wonderful, we had a junior street club because we saw how organized our parents were and how the city supported the block clubs. And we'd have all these great activities during the summer, the movies in the street, and we'd cook out. It was just wonderful. I loved it. A lot of attention paid to the school. Everybody connected to the schools. It was really a wonderful sense of community. In the 6th grade, though, that's when King was assassinated. And I can clearly remember standing on the street, and it was like silent and hurt. And nothing moved. It was just, and that's when I wrote my first poem. And my 6th grade teacher, Miss O'Connor, we had these little books. I don't know if they do that nowadays, where you have all your friends sign your little book, your parents would sign, the teachers would sign, the adults were expected to give you money. But when Miss O'Connor wrote in my book, she encouraged me to continue to write because she knew I connected like that. So that was troubling.
What ethnicity was that teacher?
She was white. Mm-hmm. My teachers in Cleveland and Glenville were black, and my teachers in East Cleveland Elementary School were white. I'm trying to remember when I didn't see a black teacher until I got to Kirk, and there weren't that many, and everybody knew who they were because there weren't that many. And we saw a few more at Shaw. And at Shaw, that's when I really connected with the heritage and the literature that started when I was in Glenville. That's when I was able to make that connection At Kirk, a little bit, but much, much more in high school.
So just let me get this straight. You went to Chambers for the rest of elementary school, then you went to Kirk, and then you went to Shaw.
Correct.
And were you part of the Shaw band
No,
or orchestra?
no. I put that violin down. I wasn't good. And I didn't want to keep playing, and I knew my parents sent me to private lessons. There was a lady that lived on Hanover, and I wish I could remember her name, but she gave me private violin lessons, and she played with the orchestra, and it just didn't work for me. So in the 9th grade, I got involved with the library, in the books. And in the 10th grade, I took my first drama class, and I loved it. And it was drama and trying out for Raisin in the Sun. And I got the role of Mama. So I had a lot of lines, and that was a lot for somebody 15 years old playing an old woman, a woman with children, and that was a lot for me to take on, but I developed that character. I figured it out. Had a great drama teacher, Fran Charnas. She demanded a lot from us. And that production went so well, we ended up taping out in Parma at Normandy High School. I wish we could find it. We also did an abbreviated version at a Jewish center in, I can't remember what municipality, but it went extremely well. And then I went on and did stage management and joined the debate team, did speech tournaments, loved it, did well. And I have to be honest with you, when got to those speech tournaments, I think it happened in Shaker. Those girls, they were like, "Where's the black guys? Where's the black guys? We want to meet the black guys." And I wasn't accustomed to. I didn't know how to take that. So that was weird. And they could smoke and all cool, And we were much more conservative. Not to say stuff didn't happen and people didn't get into fights and folks cut school, but I was pretty square. So that was eye-opening to me. And I also remember some young white kids came from Case to talk to us about race. And they were very concerned about me because I wasn't taking a line. I was very committed to black families and us getting a true sense of ourselves and building our own community. And I didn't feel any hate. I felt some confusion, but I didn't hate white people. I just wanted to be with my own and to see my own do things. That's how I felt. And they were mad at me. They couldn't understand, well, why wouldn't you want to date somebody white, or why? It's just my choice. That stuck in my head. So, and then I remember we always did Black History programs, and it was fun. The dancing, the embracing of your heritage. And I can remember being concerned that just because you embrace your heritage, does that mean you hate other people? And I didn't feel that at all. But that's the way it was taken. I didn't understand that. And when I got to college, it was even clearer. I didn't understand that. And I remember when I would see integrated couples, if it was a black man, black guy, student, he didn't speak. He wouldn't talk to us. And we would talk about that. Well, that's your choice, but how come we have to disappear? How come you can't say hi to us? So, yeah. That's when I really began to write poetry. In college is when the poems came out about relationships, about the movement, the lack of the movement, all that kind of stuff.
Where did you go to college?
Hiram College, down in Hiram, near Kent. My roommate, Maria Billow. What's the sauce you're putting in your hair, Jackie? Sauce. Maria had not been around black people at all. That, you talk about culture shocks and aftershocks. There were lots. Those were good years. There were only, the campus was really small then. It's not that big of a campus now, but we only had barely 1,000 students and probably about 150 African Americans. And I entered in the fall of 74. Probably in 70, the black students took over the main classroom building. And there was a list of demands that they had. And as we called it, Third Hinsdale, listened to those demands and met them. One of the students that was responsible for taking over Third Hinsdale, this protest, is my physician, Barry Brooks. So when we got to campus, we were introduced to what was going on and the Afro Center and just a wealth of information and a deeper understanding about Pan-Africanism. What? Black people live all over the world? What? I did have a really good teacher, Mr. Newsom at Shaw, and he taught Black history. He was excellent. So again, those building, Dinesh Guyas, who was my sociology professor, he was not afraid to talk about race. And he talked about the radical leaders, H. Rap Brown and Stokely Carmichael. Stokely Carmichael showed up at Hiram College. I had lunch with him, and it was an exciting period. We went to Kent a lot for protests, for concerts, to party. Probably in my junior year, we formed an alliance with black students at Kent and Akron University. We call it the Hat Coalition. And the intent was to promote academics, culture, awareness, justice for black students. And it was a fascinating period. I remember leading a conference at Hiram, communication seminar. This was before the Hat Coalition, because again, it was about learning how to communicate with each other and people that were different from us. And we had guest speakers, we had a newsletter, we had a ball. We were busy.
Were you saying hat?
Hack. Hiram, Akron, Kent. Yes.
I'd kind of like to get back to the earliest memories of East Cleveland, though. What kind of shops do you remember being in East Cleveland?
The Flash Shop. The Flash Shop is where you can buy very, remember the Mob Squad and the Apple hats, and you're too young to remember that, but that was the first semblance of the kind of bell bottoms, medallions, dashikis. You can buy all that stuff. And it was right on the corner of Hayden and Mann. Very stable business community. We went to the movies at the Shaw Hayden Theater. You can go to the grocery store, the drugstore, the furniture store. There was everything right there on Hayden Avenue. And there were black-owned businesses. My black history teacher, Mr. Newsom, owned a bookstore on Hayden Avenue. The library was there. There was a liquor store. It was all very self-contained. Mary's Sweet Shop, the jewelry store. It was great. It had a wonderful sense of community. And that was a secondary business district because, of course, we're not talking about Euclid Avenue or Noble Road. We're just talking about Hayden, and it was thriving. That's why it's very, very hard for me to come. It's very hard for me. It's heartbreaking, in fact, because I remember something very, very different. Mm-hmm.
And you were a young girl, but do you remember how the services were? Like in East Cleveland now, people occasionally talk about like trash pickup and
Oh yeah.
like the mitigating the high grass and stuff.
You didn't see high grass. When I talk about in good and decent order, that was the way things went in Cleveland and in East Cleveland. The judge, though, that was someone that was considered to be Judge Stanton Adams. He was a rough character. And for people that didn't live in East Cleveland, you didn't drive through East Cleveland because they were rough. And if you lived in East Cleveland, you knew you had to follow the rules. So I remember that. And they picked up your trash. And I can't remember if they walked the can back to the back, but it was supportive of, the services were supportive of the residents. It was just a good sense of order in the city. That's my earliest memory. We had a newspaper. We had two. It was the East Cleveland Leader. You got all your information in the Leader. And then later on, it was the East Cleveland Citizen. And that's how you found out about everything going on in the community and the government and that kind of thing. And it created a job for someone in our neighborhood. So I remember my neighbor Leonard, he delivered the Leader and the Citizen. Mm.
So, what are your fondest memories of East Cleveland?
How peaceful it was, and there was always something fun to do. And in high school, I remember after I did Raisin in the Sun, this lady asked me to join the Citizens Advisory Committee. I was 16 years old to represent Shaw High School, and that was May Stewart. So I remembered how it affirmed me as a leader, and it made me feel a little bit older because I had to be around adults. And two of my other siblings, we all got the Martha Holding Jennings Award, and winning a speech contest. It was just good stuff. It affirmed your leadership, your academics. My friends that played in the band, oh my goodness. You talk about school pride, community pride. The community was so committed. There was no question that parents and business owners supported the school. It wasn't even a question. It was so clear. Wherever you went, whatever part of the city, whatever store you walked in, church, The relationships were clear and they were positive. I remember that. And I thought that's the way things were always going to be.
You mentioned Ms. Stewart.
Yes.
Is she still, I've heard that name before. Is she still a community leader?
She is now, from what I understand, in a nursing home. Mrs. Stewart served and led. It was kind of like that iron fist in the velvet glove, if you will. Those memories and situations that I had to face as a young woman in East Cleveland, I will never forget. And just recently, I've been able to talk about them. When I would come home from college, my parents and I would go to the city commission meeting. We had city manager, commission form of government. And it was a little chaotic. The behavior of the commission members and the manager, it was clear there was tension. I'm talking about the 70s. So when I hear people talk about East Cleveland now and they can't believe it, I can. It's been going on for a long time. But when you had other strengths, other gifts in the community that you can focus on, you could not always focus on the behavior of the government. But as the years went by, it spilled over.
That is a perfect lead into our next question. In what ways has the city changed over time? What do you think contributed to those changes?
Couple things. At a macro level, if we understand that the U.S. government in 1980, late 70s, early 80s, stopped funding cities when revenue sharing dollars, that's what they called them, revenue sharing dollars stopped showing up in cities. East Cleveland was the most vulnerable. If you look at the fact that we had tremendous white flight and a lot of wealth left the city, those city fathers back then, in my opinion, did not build in. They didn't show us where the rocks were. The infrastructure, the pipes, the water system, the roads. There has to be a plan to repair and replace down the road. When you have a surplus, when there is stability, you could walk away and say, oh, we left the place in great shape. When black folks were not prepared to lead in government and the city charter, the codified ordinances did not reflect the sign of the times. Bad combination. Bad combination. I remember one finance director, he worked under the guy who had been there for a number of years. And the gentleman had a very unusual way of paying bills and accounting for our expenses because he wanted everything to look like it was okay. East Cleveland was a place where people really wanted to make sure it looked okay. Maybe that's the American way, the appearance of, but the whole time the thing is falling apart. And as they say that if America catches a cold, the black community gets pneumonia. And we got pneumonia in East Cleveland. When I decided that I wanted to get involved, when I was graduating from college, I contacted the city manager and he led me to a department head who was over public relations because I was a communications major in college. And they offered me a position. They knew I had volunteered and grown up in East Cleveland. By the time I graduated, that department head was gone and the city manager had been fired. Okay. So I decided to organize events. First one was People's Day at Patterson Park, and immediately got in a fight with the director of Parks and Recreation because Patterson Park looked like I don't know what, glass and debris, and who could enjoy that? So they cleaned up the park. We got musicians and folk to come out, and we had a nice little event. That was the year that, in fact, right after that fall, it wasn't even fall, it was Christmas Day, I was appointed to the city commission. I was 23 years old. And they knew I had energy. They knew I cared about the community. They knew I came from a stable family. A gentleman who had been working for the plain dealer, he was the last white commissioner, resigned. And at that time, in this country, cable television was the flavor of the month. So everybody was trying to figure out what their cable system was going to look like. Everybody meaning the municipalities. So in Washington, there was an institute established to give guidance and technical assistance to communities that were going to be involved in the process of awarding a franchise to a company in your community. So, the commission hired experts to tell us. So here I am, 23 years old, and got this call that, Jackie, we want to appoint you to the commission, but there are 3 things we need you to do when you take this. And I was like, what? We want you to vote with us to award Herald Hospital an ambulance contract. We want you to vote with us to change the name of Hayden Avenue to Martin Luther King Boulevard. And we want you to vote with us to give John Lanier the cable franchise in East Cleveland. I was like, I don't think you just give people stuff without studying. I'm a college grad, and I was proud to tell everybody. They didn't really like that. I just graduated from college, and I think we need to read. I think we need to study. I don't think we should make decisions like that. So, the other 2 issues are fine, but that cable television, that's serious. And they were in trouble because they thought that I would be overwhelmed with joy and be willing to say, whatever you guys want me to do, I'll do it. Because I was a commissioner. I was going to Washington and Atlanta and all these places, and very few women, black, white, green, yellow, whatever. You just didn't see a lot of women at those National League of Cities conferences. So I was really a fish out of water. In the meanwhile, I was working for the League of Women Voters, their Ed Fund. And when I was asked to serve on the commission, they asked me to resign from the league because they felt it would be a conflict of interest. So I didn't have a job. $1,500 a year. I was living at home with my parents. I said, okay. So Dr. Edwards, who was the superintendent of schools, well, Jackie, come on up here and sub for a couple of days until, while you're job hunting and traveling for the city. And then in 80, there was the census. So I took the test and I passed it. And it was interesting. Carl Stokes' son, Junior, was running our office. And I worked out of that office about 10 days. In the meanwhile, I got calls from Gillon. I understand you're looking for a job, young lady. Well, you know what you got to do. You got to support us, and we'll make sure that you get a job. As I proudly wore my census badge and talked about subbing at Shaw, it's like, no, I think I'll keep looking. Because when we were introduced to Mr. Lanier's proposal, it was one page. And all the criteria that was set forth for the agreement, it was clear. It was not there. So I'm like, well, how am I going to support this? It's not the right thing to do. The other company, however, they did have their ducks in a row. And, as politics goes and people see from outside in, folks do ask you to support legislation, vote for me, I'm trying to get this contract, all that palms, grease on it. That's real. It's real. What people don't understand is the pressure and the expectation to do it. Because you're in that environment and you got to operate. You got to survive. You want to get some stuff done as a legislator, and if you don't play the game, nobody's going to support your legislation. So, in June of 1980, I got a call from May Stewart, and she said, you have a dark cloud hanging over your head. What? I got a dark cloud? What do you mean? I can't tell you. But you got a dark cloud hanging over your head. So, of course, I'm upset and I'm scared. So, I got a subpoena at home that I had violated the city charter because I subbed at Shaw High School for 3 days, and I worked for the Census Bureau for 10 days. That constituted a violation of the charter. You cannot hold any public office except being a member of the state militia or being a notary. The subpoena came from the Ohio Supreme Court. So I was speechless. And my mother kept trying to talk to me, and I was speechless. So folks who were supporting me, they came to my aid, directed me to an attorney, helped pay my legal fees, that kind of thing. I'm facing this lawsuit. And in the meanwhile, we were moving forward with awarding a franchise agreement to TBA. So we had beginning to have hearings about it, people coming and testifying. And in the meanwhile, the other company, led by Gillon, collected signatures to have it put on the ballot. Do you want cable television in East Cleveland? Vote yes. Vote yes. So our job was, those that supported TBA, is to let the voters know we've already awarded a franchise. We had to do first, second, third reading. We did it slow because some things do get passed by emergency. I'm surprised I remember all this stuff. But it's the same way with any legislative body. So we went out on the polls on the day that Lanier and all his folks were out telling people to vote for cable television. So John Lanier's son came to the poll that I was and threatened to kill me. So I called my dad, and he showed up to the poll with a gun. So it was tough. It was tough. They had eventually asked me to tell me to go home, because it was getting crazy. So we defeated them. They did not get their votes. So TBA moved forward and became the cable television franchise in East Cleveland. That fall, I went to the National League of Cities conference in Atlanta.
Okay, so before the pause, you were talking about going to the international city.
To the National League of Cities.
National League of Cities.
Mm-hmm.
You got there?
Yes. And I guess what I had not explained is when the lawsuit was filed against me with the Ohio Supreme Court, it was filed by an attorney, Carl Character, and it was filed on behalf of John Hughley, whose children went to school with me. And John, when I lost my seat, because I lost that case, they appointed John Hughley to my seat. So at the National League of Cities conference, George Forbes came up to me and said, you're going to lose that case. And I said, what do you mean? He said that there was a precedent established because Elijah Wheeler was sued in the same manner based on the same clause in the charter. He was an employee of Cuyahoga County, and back in 1970, the commissioners made $700 a year, and he had 8 sons, so of course he had to work. And he was working for the county, and when his colleagues disagreed with him, they filed the lawsuit using that clause. So it was so easy for them to go to the Supreme Court, bypass common pleas, and go to the Supreme Court in my case. So that's why George told me. And when I got home from the league, not too soon after that, I got a call from the Associated Press. They called me on the phone. It was a radio interview, and asked me, did I know that I had lost the case? I was like, no, I haven't spoken to my attorney. And he said, well, there's been a decision made by the Supreme Court, and you've lost the case. So, plain dealer, press, front page. Front page. I'm 23. These are Ronald Reagan years. It's a tough time. So there was a final council meeting. I'm sorry, not council, but city commission meeting, and I vowed to return to that legislative body. I was honest. The Plain Dealer did, not the Plain Dealer, but actually the Cleveland Press's coverage was the most balanced. I remember that. that they really try to tell the story. Plain Dealer had a little tilt, but the press was good. So I ended up losing that seat. I ran in 1981. I was the first runner-up. May Stewart jumped in that race. She was out of it, but she got back into the commission race. She beat me. I was the first runner-up. In 1983, I ran again. I lost by 135 votes. The number came out the next day. We had lottery by then. 1984, my father passed away the first day, January 84. 1985, I ran again, first runner-up, lost by 13 votes. It was so close they had to do a recount. 1986, my brother just died in his sleep, just left here. So by that time, emotionally, I'm not at all financially or any way else ready to take on another race. But I was told I didn't have a choice. I was too close. So in 87, I ran and I won. And I served 3 two-year terms. That cable issue dogged me the entire time I was there. Threats, newspaper, innuendo. It was always something about cable. But in the meanwhile, I was able to do some good. I hope that I demonstrated that young people can serve and serve well, despite obstacles. Had not really established my career. I was really young, and a female too. But nonetheless, I served. And my last term was over in 1993, and I joined Neighborhood Centers Association in the fall of 1994 as a neighborhood facilitator in support of neighborhood leadership, Cleveland. And I've been doing that work for 19 years. So.
I have a couple questions about your time in city council and as a commissioner. So the charter was changed and went from a commissioner manager form of government to a mayor council form of government in 1985.
Correct.
Okay. So when you say you ran in 1981 and 1982, were you running for a commission seat?
I ran for city commission in 1981 and 1983. There was a charter review commission called together hastily. And I was not in support of some of the changes that they made for mayor council. A lot of stuff, even now, they're having to go back and correct because they rushed through the process. Darrell Pittman was elected as the first mayor of East Cleveland, and I, of course, lost that race by 13 votes to Wallace Davis, who went on to become mayor later on.
But when you were initially, you were appointed as a commissioner?
Yes.
The first time?
Yes.
Okay, and that was because someone was retiring?
Yeah, I was trying to remember his name. He worked for the Plain Dealer. Oh my goodness. Oh, God. I'll remember. But yeah, I can't remember his name. I do have a scrap. I'm going to bring you a scrapbook so you can see. That's why the bio stuff, but I have pictures from the newspaper where you can see some of the things.
So, what was the difference between the commissioner form of government and the city council form of government that you saw?
City management is a real profession. And the city commission is the legislative body. They hire and fire the city manager. And of course, he hires his own staff. The idea is that a city manager would not be as political and that he would focus on the business of the community, and that your legislative body would be the elected officials and deal with the political aspects of city life. There are different kinds of, they call them strong mayor, council, weak mayor, but nonetheless, the form of government that was selected called for an elected mayor and elected city council. So everything became political. And the mayor, in fact, hires staff, and the city council has the ability to hire their own staff. Both the commission and the city council, they vote on the budget. They, the mayor or the city manager has an estimate that the commission or the city council has to approve. So there's still, though they are different, there was still some commonality in how we approach legislation and budget issues.
And so, were you part of the commission when the two commissioners were charged with theft in office?
I was not. I served with them. Mr. Pace and Edith Head. Spent a lot of time with them. They were charged, I think that all started happening maybe in '82. I can't remember when all of that stuff started to unravel. And it's funny because I remember how casual and loose, you were really, you were Commissioner Gillon. The police brought you your mail. If you can drive to city commission meeting, they would come and get you and bring you home. It was a lot of that. And it was real strange for me. So the respect was obvious that they paid for the legislative body and the city manager. So.
Well, I do have a question. You talked about how little the commissioners were paid, and even today how little city councilors are paid, and it makes it necessary for you to either be independently wealthy or have some sort of business practice.
Yes.
Given the way the charter was set up then, that you couldn't have another outside job, do you feel like that was a classist practice, that they were saying that you could only sit on as a commissioner if you could afford to be there?
Yes. I mean, that's the core of governance. You govern based on affluence. You don't govern based on your ability or your commitment to the community. You govern because you have money. You have independence. And therefore you have authority. That's what governance, that's how the system of government was built on. You had to be an attorney or a doctor or someone or owned a thriving business to be trusted, to be held in high esteem, and more than likely, you were a man, a white man. So it was not built for any other option but that. So that's why the charter appeared the way that it did, because you had so many other options. They didn't think about a school teacher being a legislator. How could that be? So yeah, very much so. Very elitist.
So you were in office when fiscal emergency was declared the first time in 1988 during
Correct.
Mayor Pittman's.
Yes, that was my first term. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Mayor Pittman wanted to give the appearance that everything was okay. Because that's the way you did things. You always made it look like everything was okay. But the reality is we were in trouble. And we didn't want to be, and this was his his second term as mayor. And he didn't want it to look like, because we only had 2-year terms. When they changed the charter, 2 years, 2 years. He did not want to look like he didn't have it together. Had a very strong finance director. And right now, she is the finance director for the city of Cleveland. So we had very strong leadership and was advised well. And she told the truth. Those were our conditions. It was very difficult to get to that point. Remember I was saying how there was a finance director who served under one of the long term during the old regime? Well, he had bills. There were things that had not been paid. The city did not have a clear picture of its financial status for a long time. When Mrs. Dumas was hired, she dug in deep and she made her recommendations. And we just didn't have it. Besides the fact, when businesses would leave East Cleveland, they weren't replaced with other businesses. You just look up one day and they were gone. So even our relationship with the business community was weakened. The commercial district weakened. The change from homeowners to East Cleveland is it's not a rental, well now it is, but it's a bedroom community, meaning that it was never the intent from the old days when the system was built that commercial and business would fund the operation of the city. It's supposed to be property tax because it's homeowner community. So you got all these factors besides the fact that water was leaking in the ground. Even in 1980, they estimated about 25% of the water was leaking in the ground. We had huge infrastructure issues. So all of that coupled together, garbage contracts, everything, it was pretty chaotic and expensive. And the fiscal emergency was declared. There's newspaper clippings about that too, all of this stuff. So, yeah.
So, do you feel like the mayor council form of government inherited all of the mess of the commission?
Yes.
So in other interviews, I've heard people talk about the fact that people feel like from the outside that when Black leaders stepped forward and started taking care of the city of East Cleveland, that things fell apart, and that from the outside people would blame that on Black leadership.
Yes.
But how do you feel about what was happening before in the commission form of government, how that led to, was it happenstance that Black leaders were stepping in and that things fell apart? Or how do you feel about the confluence of those two things?
I believe that, and again, it is dangerous to separate East Cleveland's circumstances from what was going on in this country at the time and the forces that led to losing revenue sharing dollars and not having the water department subsidized. There were subsidies available so you can you can repair your system, but again the lack of planning and this paranoia about integration. And we didn't learn well from Cleveland Heights and Shaker Heights. Shaker Heights made an investment in integration. They made an investment in making sure people didn't flee. Because when they fled leadership, resources left with them. And the other thing is, the reality is, the steel mills, the automobile industry, those jobs dried up. Homeowners could not hold on to their property anymore. So it was, and then you put drugs on top of that, the crack epidemic. So how in the world would you expect, without an investment, for a community that's a bedroom community to survive. We also don't invest in training leaders, training and supporting leaders. So yes, black people were stepping into leadership roles, but these were folks that did not have a legislative background, a municipal background. They were laymen. I remember the Ohio, there was an Ohio group that supported elected officials. We had National League of Cities and the Ohio League of Cities. They did step in finally and began to institute new council, new elected officials programs, and now the universities do it. But that was an era when people didn't do that. Folks just told you what to do, and it was OJT. So we have this expectation for you to step in, but you're not prepared to step in. So it's easy to say, well, black people couldn't lead themselves. And for many years, I would fight with folks about that it was not about a color issue. It was about setting the stage for success. And the stage was not set for East Cleveland to be stable. It just wasn't. And it permeated every institution in the community, every system in the community. So, yeah.
So, this isn't necessarily about the changes in East Cleveland, but while we're talking about fiscal emergency, what are your thoughts about the current return to fiscal emergency?
If there had been, the revenues stay flat. The income of East Cleveland, if you go back and look, and I've been away, I haven't been in office in 20 years, but I know that you can look at it yourself. When you don't have substantial change in home ownership, businesses, people that can pay taxes, support the community, but your costs continue to rise, what in the world can you expect? You have to have staff to run the city, so you got to have that. But unfortunately, even for a politician or someone to get elected, they promise to hire people. You got to hire people. So, and unfortunately, the expectation about salaries, if your revenues stay flat and your salaries increase and you've got union contracts, what do you expect? So I was not surprised. Hurt and disappointed for the city, but not surprised, because we've never enjoyed the opportunity to have a legislative body and a mayor that were committed to work together, to push aside the politics, to figure out how do we create an environment that's inviting for families to come and purchase homes, that's inviting for businesses to clear out land and to establish businesses. The location is marvelous, but we haven't had the political environment nor the resources that would create enough wealth to support the government fiscal emergency.
And do you feel like when you were in office, do you feel like the council and the mayor were working well together, or was it an adversarial relationship?
At that time, you know, when you're riding in the same boat and you clear, you're in the same boat, you figure out how you have to do things together. I have to credit Sharon Dumas for rising above personality and to commit herself to, these are the facts, this is what I'm recommending, And the mayor agreeing with those recommendations, and the city commission having to be wise and say, okay, this is what we have to do. So our remedies for, we floated bonds, we did some work, some real work, to make sure we had a path out of fiscal emergency. But it was always shaky because you never had that space where business was going to come in, or a whole lot of home ownership increasing to give you the revenue. The revenues stay flat. So where we had that space for creativity, it's not a lot of that anymore. So Sharon was is well respected, was well respected at the time. But the politics continued. You know, I had a tough time. I was young, personally not stable, you know, job thing, and, you know, and really took on the tough legislation. When we had to pass on, I remember it's countless times, increases on water sewer rate, give it to Jackie. Jackie will sponsor that. Because it took some courage and it took some heat. And I was still getting beat up about the cable stuff, and that issue continued to linger. So the politics continued. And when I didn't agree, then the fact that I was going to get evicted from my apartment, or I had a tax bill, that became news. The next day, I'm telling you, that's what I lived with. The next day, it was in the paper. And folks decided if she couldn't play along with us years ago, she's not going to serve in comfort this time. To the point in 2000, long after I was gone, the Grand Dame publicly asked for my forgiveness. She admitted that she tried to destroy my life and to destroy my dreams. She kept a file on me. She knew where I lived. I always lived in East Cleveland, but I changed addresses a couple times. She kept up with that. But she finally asked me to forgive her because she did try to destroy me. The same lady that called me and told me that I had that dark cloud hanging over my head.
That would be May Stewart?
Yes. God bless her. And I did forgive her.
Okay, I feel like this might be a good place for us to stop, so we can continue this at a later place. So I just want to say thank you very much for joining us, and I really look forward to finishing this interview.
Okay.
So, one more time, this is Misty Luminais and Hank Smith. We're with the Social Justice Institute for the Voicing in Action Project. We're here with Jacqueline Gillon, and it is May 21st, 2013.
Want the city council and the mayor to know it's not about you. And it hurts because I remember countless times while I served, it became about a person or a privilege or a vote. But the citizens really lose when you fight, when you don't make up your mind to get along, when you don't take the high road, when you are intentional about being chaotic or disagreeable or personal. It really hurts. It hurts the community deeply. And that's why I think that's one of the reasons, besides the macro issues, that we haven't moved forward. Because if we decided to get along and to set an agenda that was not personal, but was about the future of the community, people will be more interested in investing and moving in. But when you continue to create an environment of distrust and chaos, There's always going to be conflict, but it's the way you handle conflict. You handle it with dignity and respect. Then that will attract the folks we need in East Cleveland. So I want to say that.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
This is Misty Luminais. I'm here with Hank Smith, and we're interviewing Jacqueline Gillon. This is the second part of our interview for the Social Justice Institute's Voicing and Action Project, and it is May 23rd. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
24th.
Oh, May 24th.
Is it really?
That's
Okay.
what the camera said.
May 24th.
When we were talking the last time, we had started talking about in what ways the city's changed over time, and I think we talked a lot about the shifts in government and politics, but there are a few things I still wanted to touch on. I'm particularly interested in the housing part of
Yes.
East Cleveland, and I'm interested in the politics of housing, because I've heard that there were some corrupt inspectors. Can you share anything about that? Shed some light on?
First of all, East Cleveland has had a tradition of a pretty sound housing code. In fact, East Cleveland's housing code was used as a template for other municipalities who wanted to ensure that they did a pretty thorough job. And for some people, it was felt that our housing code was pretty strict. And the housing department endeavored to make sure that complaints were responded to, and that we had pre-sale inspections, and they were a priority for the community. What I do really believe happened during the transition, the white flight, and it changed in the beginning in the late 50s into the mid 60s into the 70s, I think when it pretty much, the transition stabilized, is that there was a departure from really paying attention to the code, that people were so anxious to get out. There were pre-sale inspections, but I don't know if they were good. It was good follow-up. That was the sense I got from my parents and other individuals who were long-term homeowners in the city. And then what I experienced once I became a housing inspector, which I did do in 1984, was that we were so behind, and the files were behind. And yes, I would say that there were situations where inspectors, property owners didn't always do the right thing in terms of making sure that inspections were passed. I'll put it that way. And I think that's indicative of government, period, that unfortunately laws are broken, policies are bent, and especially when the code is pretty strict and it's pretty subjective. One inspector would hold you accountable to certain things, and another inspector would not hold you accountable. And it's really on the inspector. So what can you say? And it would be pretty tough to point the finger at one particular individual, though I'm sure there's a legend about several. But overall, I don't think it's anything more unusual that happens in other places. But because we started out with a very strict code, I think it was always this effort to how do I make this work for me? So I don't know if that helps or not, but that's kind of what I've seen over the years. And unfortunately, with the foreclosure crisis and other things, you just can't keep up with the number of complaints and pre-sales and that kind of thing. And I hope that they're still doing pre-sales because it protects the homeowners and new home buyers. So I'd be interested to see if they still do pre-sale inspections.
So I wanted to talk about some of the other changes that you saw in the city. When did you leave East Cleveland?
In 2003.
So between the time when you moved in 1966 and 2003, can you describe some of the demographic changes or the changes in the neighborhoods that you saw?
There were numerous changes. What was very, very obvious, um, the changes in the business districts, the loss of business, those places that like drugstores, furniture stores, things, clothing. I described some of the African American businesses. They left. It was just sadly a time where we saw the unraveling, particularly on Hayden Avenue. That was my home neighborhood, and that's where we saw it. It was glaring. And then over the years, it trickled over to Euclid. And it was not the kind of transition that would support letting people know that this property is available. If you want to buy it, people just left. They just left. And you looked around one day and the business was gone. But they're fortunately like Cat Piano. They've been in East Cleveland a number of years and still maintain property there. My dry cleaners, Pete, at Satellite Cleaners on Hayden Avenue, he has survived all these years of loss, basically. The relationship with the schools and the community changed, where we saw deep involvement with parents and the businesses and community organizations and the schools. I think that's overall. I've seen it with my work in the city of Cleveland too, where those relationships became detached, and the support for the students and the schools was not there. Cleanliness of the streets, that it changed the love and care that folks from not just the residents, but the government, everybody, it just changed. The more bad publicity and negative things people would say about East Cleveland, it in fact became a situation that got treated that much more worse. So it was pretty heartbreaking. Crime increased. The reason why I left East Cleveland, my house kept getting broken into. And though I enjoyed a decent relationship with the police department and they responded to me, and I knew some of the officers for a number of years, that didn't mean I was not going to be subject to crime. It just meant that I know the police department. And that crime happened in the apartment buildings and the houses. I believe the drug epidemic had a lot to do with it. I believe our youth not having anything to do and getting attached to the wrong folks in the neighborhood, negative mentors instead of positive mentors added to that. So it just became a departure from order.
And when do you think that change started?
Actually, I saw it, I can remember when I was in college, between 74 and 78, when I would come home for spring break, summer break, I'd go to city commission meetings, just out in the neighborhood. Things were changing. My classmates, and I won't say my classmates left just because things were changing in East Cleveland. Overall, the availability of jobs and entrepreneurial experiences meant that a lot of college-educated young people did not return to East Cleveland, did not return to Cleveland, but moved elsewhere, and it left a void in young leadership, folks that would buy homes, has settled into the community. And nowadays, it's pretty commonplace. We just don't see the repopulating of our folks in our neighborhoods. Our second and third generation residents are not there like they used to. So it was very unfortunate. When I first got involved in politics, I looked around and in the community, and I was a baby. And there weren't a lot of my generation involved. They were doing other things or not living there anymore. So.
Okay, we're going to shift gears a little bit. How has race or racism impacted you personally?
In a very significant way. I have to say, and I just believe that God intended on me to see what I've seen and hear what I've heard. As a child, and I believe I mentioned this before, I remember the civil rights movement and watching it on television and hearing my parents' conversations about what was said and done in the workplace. And when we moved from Glenville to East Cleveland, how rocks were thrown at us and we were called niggas. And my sister said to me the other day, Jackie, don't you remember when they wrote on our garage? And I probably just ignored this. When things are painful, you just erase them. And she made me remember that it was not just a name calling, but they spray painted the garage. But on the other token, they were very, very caring, loving, concerned whites that stayed and developed relationships in the community. I remember one pastor and his family, the Funderburgs, they stayed as long as they could. He got another pastoral assignment. I remember the Chamberlain family that were intentional about reaching out. On Hayden, there was a little office, and it was really about getting to know your neighbors and let's do some things together, so that when people get to know each other as human beings, then the distrust is it goes away, and you start to have an understanding. It's one thing when you work with people because you can go home, but when they live in your neighborhood or they live next door to you, then it's different. And unfortunately, I think that the real estate community had a lot to do with, and both black and white real estate agents, I think they came together and they saw a money-making opportunity, and it was East Cleveland, and they played on the fears of people. I believe, unfortunately, that racism is a part of this society and that we have to learn how to manage it and learn from it. I don't know, you can't legislate the hearts of people, but you can certainly, on an interpersonal level, do some things. On a system level, structural, I think there's deep denial about the impact and the presence of racism. Even when there was the I don't know how to put it, and I want to sneeze. Excuse me. You can take that out, right? Okay, good. When there was corruption in East Cleveland government, it wasn't a black-white thing, because there was black and white folks involved. It was a criminal thing. And the intent was to take money. And the issue around racism is around privilege. And those that were white, that were involved, they had the privilege of having resources and legal representation, where some of our other folks just simply didn't have that privilege. So time and time again, I've seen where racism and internalized racism, which is an issue that people don't talk about a lot or really understand, but that's the negative behavior of African Americans toward each other, toward ourselves, where we've taken in all that hatred and that self-loathing, and we have a difficult time working together, trusting each other, making plans together, having patience with each other, because it has divided us. And besides privilege, the internalized racism is so detrimental to everybody. So I think those two things together, personally and structurally, it's killing us. And I don't know if it's going to go away. I would hope we reduce it, but I'm not sure in my lifetime that it'll go away.
Do you have any stories about, you had a couple of stories when you were a child. Do you have any examples of, as an adult, where you've experienced racism?
In college, I went to Hiram College, and the notion that you embrace your culture and you want to exercise the values and norms that you know as a part of your culture was viewed as anti-white. And it wasn't true. And I still don't understand how it can be interpreted as such, except for the fact that there is fear. So to have an Afro Center and to have a newsletter and to stand up when they took away our African American Studies program and to protest things that weren't right did not mean we hated white people, but that's the way it was taken. And that was difficult. And I was pretty outspoken during those years, and we were very outspoken about how the administration was racist. They practiced racist policies out of ignorance, fear, whatever. And as a result, I can remember having some tough days academically, being measured by different yardstick because I was outspoken. But I knew I needed to do that. And I did find out later on that there was respect from my white friends, that I had the courage to do that. And that's the other thing you find out. Not everybody thinks the same. But unfortunately, racism tends to be a blanket and it covers everything. But what you find out is that there is some understanding of struggle, and people will come along and work with you.
So you talk about the Afro Center and other aspects. Can we talk a little bit about the positive side of race for you as kind of an identity? Is it a source of strength? Is it?
Oh yeah. Yeah, when you talk about, when you get the conversation moved away from racism and you have the opportunity to celebrate who you are, it is very exciting. Since I was a child, I've always loved our history and the literature and would seek it. I've learned so much about who we are as a people through, I'll give you a great example. There were just wonderful poets from the 1700s, Phyllis Wheatley and forward, who had just a marvelous way of expressing themselves about the order of the day, about racism, about slavery, about our beauty, about our worth. And it's just so, it gives me a lot of, I know I stand on the shoulders of some wonderful folks. And as I write, I know that there's nothing new under the sun, and that their spirits move on, live on, and that it's important for me to honor that that work was done years ago, and that there's some balance between angry literature and literature that inspires and strengthens you. There's got to be that balance. So I try to really devote my writing and my thinking along the lines of what's going to inspire someone to move forward or strengthen them.
And so did you ever participate in the Black empowerment movement?
I attended, there were, again, back to my high school and college years, there were always opportunities to attend festivals and rallies. I was not involved with the Panthers or anything like that, but again, the Alliance for Black Consciousness was our organization at Hiram that was dedicated to lifting up the positive ideals of being an African American student at Hiram College. And in fact, several years ago, I and others were honored for our work as being a part of that Black organization, which was good because, there have been a lot of years that have passed since then. And those students talked about being able to go back in the archives and read what we wrote and look at our meeting notes and that kind of thing. And that we were very serious, so we were very serious. We thought we knew. We thought we had it all figured out, and then graduation day, and then you're back to reality. But so much of when you're isolated on a college campus and you return, you have a fresh perspective on things. You really do. So, yeah.
So how has race or racism impacted the city of East Cleveland?
Over and over again. And I forgot to mention theater. And when I think about East Cleveland and theater, it's like East Cleveland was the example of how Black folks don't know how to lead themselves. That they're giving these positions of authority and power, and they destroy the community. But the reality is, when you're not armed with the tools, the foundation of leadership, yes, power mismanaged is very detrimental. And it was like watching a play, because everybody had this role. All the legislators had this role, and they played the role, but it was the political environment. It had nothing to do with community, and that's what was so frightening for me. It had nothing to do with community or a sense of humanity. They're playing this role, this game, like you had lines. Are you going to run for city commission? Oh no, I'm not running. And that person would be the first person to file a petition to run for office, because you don't tell the truth. You're always cagey. You give a politically correct answer where you really don't know if the person's saying yes or no. That's what's unfortunate. That's why you can't get to the heart of real decision making and real transformation. It's playing a game, political game.
So, did you have something about the East Cleveland Theater in particular?
The East Cleveland Theater was another place where you saw blacks and whites together. That's where you saw honoring the arts, and where Japanese, white, black, all kinds of people came together. And one of the founders, one of the original members of the theater, Johnny Wilburn Kawasaki, passed away last year. And it was such a reminder to us of how the arts is the common denominator, and how the arts can resolve or help us to understand who we are as human beings, that beauty is beauty and love is love. And I just hope that we continue to use the arts as a way for us to reclaim our humanity. I think it's important. And maybe perhaps that's how East Cleveland can begin to reclaim its humanity. You cannot ignore your history. You cannot ignore your art. You cannot ignore your culture. When you don't pay attention to that, then people are confused. Our children are confused. They don't know who they are, which again is a challenge for us. Our children, our young people need to have a sense of their history and culture, not to be anti, but to provide them with a solid foundation for their identity.
So, kind of redirecting back to the city of East Cleveland, can you talk a little bit about how race and racism has impacted the city specifically?
It really deals with the whole notion of the labeling of a black city. At one point, we used to brag about East Cleveland is the largest black city, all black city in the country. And then we were second to East St. Louis. Well, see, East St. Louis, their city hall was put on sale. So what is it that we lift up black cities with the notion that they cannot lead themselves, that they can't prosper or survive? And I just believe that where's the interest? Where is the interest in seeing something black survive, thrive, not just survive, but where is the interest? If we ask the business community, corporate community, the civic community, are we very interested in seeing black businesses survive? Do we care? And if we ask those hard questions, I believe we would get silence. I believe they would be silent because no one wants to admit that they are comfortable. There are black people that do not believe we have the ability to do so because they've swallowed the racism themselves. And the issue of class, which is very much connected to race, says to us that anything that's African American, impoverished, either kill it or you attach it to something else that it can't stand on its own. I used to get into these debates with folks about East Cleveland because they, Jackie, we might as well annex it. You know the plan? They're going to annex Forest Hills to Cleveland Heights, and the rest will go to Glenville or some of the other wards in Cleveland. That's been a thought because that's an all-black city. Who's gonna make sure? So the reintegration of the city, mixing incomes and the kind of people that move into the city, that care about the green space and the housing stock, the location is some of the solution. But to continue to feed the racist thought that just because a community is black cannot survive is really what I think East Cleveland has mainly suffered from. The media has just, over the years, has just had a field day over and over again with East Cleveland, that black city.
Looking at the development around East Cleveland, do you feel like, I mean, there's some disparity between how Shaker Heights, like the kinds of fun Shaker Heights, Cleveland Heights get compared to East Cleveland? Do you think that's based on race? Or
Race and class. I believe it's race and class.
Race and class?
Yeah, I believe it's race and class. By design. The Shaker tax base, the Shaker business community. I mean, Shaker is internationally known as a thriving, integrated suburb in Cleveland with some affluence. And that's going to be always protected. Who is going to protect East Cleveland?
Okay, so now I want to talk about inequality. So we're talking about unequal access to political, social, or material resources, opportunities, or rewards based on specific characteristics such as race, gender, age, physical or mental ability, sexual orientation, religion, class, geographic region, etc. So how has inequality impacted you personally?
I remember when I graduated from college, and I don't know if I can comfortably say it's inequality, but the privilege piece. My dad worked for Fisher Body, and he wanted to make sure I got a job, a good paying job. And like other families that have been able to get relatives hired on, pass the baton through employment or entrepreneurial opportunities, he wanted the same thing. I remember there was a labor relations position open, and they just kind of looked at him like he was crazy. Like, oh, you think you're going to help your daughter get a job here? Really? So that was hurtful. The first job I got after I graduated from college, in fact, was at a place called Sanford Rose Associates. And they were employment counselors. And got the job and thought it was a real opportunity to help others find employment. Well, the first thing I was told was that they didn't want me going to lunch with the young white secretary. We're both the same age. And just clicked, you know. We went to lunch, and when I came back, oh, you all won't be going to lunch again. And then they wanted to know, because I stayed there about 3 or 4 months, where did you find all these qualified black people? These black people have degrees. How do you know these people? So I called my father, and I would tell him what was going on. And then I couldn't take it. It was so uncomfortable. How dare you tell me who I can't go to lunch with? And how dare you assume that black folks don't have education? So that early on, it was just amazing. And that's the inequality. Had I been white, it wouldn't have been a question. But for black people to have college educations and no other black people with education, wow, amazing. How was that? So, yeah. Hopefully, and that's been some years ago, things have changed. And I think for some of us, it has changed. Unfortunately, we still have this growing underclass with lack of access to education, relationships, and resources that would lift them up. And I also think, while we're talking about inequality, is that our major culture has embraced the dumbing down of people, of how we speak, of being educated, that it's cool. It's cool. But it's not cool. It's not cool, especially when that is interpreted by some of our young people as an excuse not to be the best. That ignorance is popularized, it's popular, and it's entertaining. And it's not funny to me at all. And that models of excellence and quality should be what they see, not what's on television, on the internet. And I think there's racism plays a role because Black folks, Hispanic people don't have that privilege to be different, to act ignorant. We don't have that leeway, that flexibility. It's important. It's a different standard for us. We have to be all that we can be, because that's just the way it is. We don't have those options. So, to me, that's inequality. That you don't have the opportunity to fall on your face. Because you fall on your face, that's a permanent falling on your face. If you have privilege, then you have an opportunity to get back up eventually, and there are people around you that have access, where there's others that don't have that access. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Who do you think benefits from that system?
I'm sorry?
Who do you think benefits from that?
The popular culture, the dominant culture, because that's control. I think that in any society, those that oppress are privileged, and if you oppress or you don't allow for equity, you believe that it covers, it secures your position. But in reality, it is a wearing away of the whole society. It just tears everybody down eventually. And I think in Cleveland in particular, we are a place that operates out of fear, especially in areas of entrepreneurship and employment. If folks can't get a job, if they can't open a business, and then others can, then there'll always be those who have and those who have not. So.
And have you ever experienced sexism?
Yes. Well, yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Oh, yeah. Gosh, there's so many. Wow, I can't say where I haven't. It's just so, I've experienced it in a church, I've experienced it in a workplace. It's just there. And again, it's about the power thing. Men, they have power. They have power to touch you inappropriately, say inappropriate things to you, not pay you as much, whisper about you. It's that power thing. And on top of everything else, when you're a woman that overcomes and has been able to attain some things, then that's still negative, because You're a woman. And that's holding the men back. Women are getting all the privileges and the opportunities, and the guys are being left behind. So it's kind of sad. I don't dwell on it. I don't dwell on racism or sexism, any of the isms, but I know it's there.
How would you advise a young black woman growing up? Like, what would you offer to her when she encounters those kind of things?
It is very important to have a relationship with God, that your spiritual self must be fully developed, and you must spend time developing your spiritual self, because what you will experience on the human plane, in the physical world, will perplex you, frighten you, and could hold you back. But knowing that you weren't created out of fear, that there's a plan for your life, and that you must embrace your gifts and your talents. It's very important for young women to love and know themselves and all your beauty and intellect and spirit. Very important. When you do not have a clear definition of yourself, not from an arrogant physical self, but your spirit and your mind, then you have a plan for your life. You will attract the things that will benefit you. But if you dwell in a place that does not embrace the best of you, then you're open to things that men will say, society will say, that's not you. So I would say that women need to pay particular attention to their spiritual selves. Yes.
And have you encountered ageism at all? I know you were a city councilor very young,
Yeah.
or a commissioner at a very young age.
Yes, yeah.
Did you get it on either side for being too young, or now that you're an older person?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. That's so funny. We're talking about that. Yeah, the whole thing about you're too young. You need to wait your turn. And now that I'll be 57 in a couple of weeks. Is you're an elder, and I never thought about that, but it makes it clear what my assignment is, because I experienced it on both sides, that the intergenerational work is important and it's powerful. I love being in the room with young folks, people my age, folks older than me. All the generations need to be in the decision-making rooms together. We need to be at church, in the universities. We need to be together, because there's so much we can learn from each other. But we've got to learn how to listen to each other and be respectful. In our last leadership class, there was a young man that loved to tease the elders in the class. And I don't think he recognized that teasing and sarcasm can be dangerous, because you shut yourself out of some relationships that will benefit you. While he has the youthful energy and the new knowledge, the wisdom and the relationships he'll miss. So, yeah.
And how has inequality impacted the city of East Cleveland?
I don't know if it's inequality or is it a lack of equity. And the equity piece really speaks to access to reinvestment resources. Again, it's being written off because there's that poor little black town, you know, and not being looked at from its assets, but always the attention paid to the deficiencies, to what's wrong with East Cleveland. And always paying attention to, you know how the squeaky wheel gets all the oil, gets all the grease? Paying attention to, we have some negative spokespersons. We have some folks that are, they like to focus on, they like to take advantage of what's wrong for attention's sake, instead of saying, let's build some relationships here that we can say to the Cleveland Foundation or the county that we're building something different in East Cleveland, that there's a different energy here, and we need some investment in this energy and this vision. As Cleveland is reimagining itself, East Cleveland and the rest of the county must do so too. Unfortunately, the county exec was just speaking at our graduation last week. It is clear that the wealth has moved out of the central city and the entering suburbs, East Cleveland, and the wealth is in the outer ring, and how we have to be much more focused on supporting what's in the inner ring, unless there's a plan to gut it out and take it all over, which happens. It happened in DC, where the poor folks were pushed out, the wealth moved back into Washington, and the folks that had no money and no resources, they ended up on the outskirts. I don't know, it might be a plan to say, okay, East Cleveland, kill yourselves off, we'll be back to pick up the pieces and rebuilding. We're right next door to University Circle. We're close. We're still kind of close to the lake and the highways, all the assets. We want them, but we don't want those poor people. We don't want those disagreeable black folks. So I don't know. It might be a design behind all this madness. I don't know.
As a legitimate danger. So what we were talking about just now, would you call that gentrification?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. I witnessed that in the 80s in Washington. Prince George County, Maryland, is where a lot of the black people were pushed out to. And the area around the White House and the Capitol, those outskirts of Washington where, you know, people with wealth would want to live. It's convenient because they work for the government, federal or otherwise. So, yes, very much so. Gentrification. I could easily see that happening with East Cleveland. They just wait a little bit longer, it's going to all fall apart, and we can get it back.
Did you see any signs of those before you left in 2003?
No, what I saw signs of is lack of vision. It's the whole notion of the elected officials and the government not seeing the forest for the trees, being so wrapped up in their own particular power struggles, the bigger picture escape them, which makes it ripe for the picking. That's what I saw.
So, I know this happened after you left, but when the Huron Hospital was closed, they opened the Stephanie Tubbs Jones Center in its place. Do you feel like access to healthcare is an inequality that East Cleveland has experienced?
I think it's overall it's a class issue. The investment of any of those quality of life necessities, healthcare, work, transportation, quality housing, education, are dictated by wealth. So here you have a community that's not wealthy, that's under-resourced. Why not take the hospital out? Let them use the clinic. And if they really get sick, they'll go to one of the hospitals in the suburbs or Cleveland Clinic, which Cleveland Clinic controls a lot of that. But you know what I'm saying? Metro Health is a long ways from East Cleveland. West 25th is quite a ways from East Cleveland. And every day there are people traveling to Metro Health from East Cleveland. Fortunately, they have automobiles. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's just a trend, an unfortunate trend, that we're under-resourcing communities where people don't have money. Yeah. Yep.
Can you recollect a memory or instance when the community fought for something?
East Cleveland? I think the last one, and this is it's pretty sad. When the junior high school that I attended, Kirk, when the state provided resources to rebuild the school, several of the school board members decided to rename the school. And there were a lot of people, including myself, that just hated that. And I didn't get on the front line, but there were folks on the front line of that effort not to rename the school Heritage, which they ended up doing anyway, because two folks decided that they didn't want the name Kirk to be carried on. But you just don't do that. That's one of your institutions. And there was a big fight about that. It was lost. It's Kirk. It's Heritage Middle School now, but yeah. There have been several instances where I've seen the rallying, but it's always about something that's wrong. I want to see the rallying for something that's right, something that we've worked together to develop, that we've planned and we've learned how to cooperate together, and now we're going to fight to see it happen.
So do you see any positive things that the community could rally around?
Yes. I believe, and because I don't want to make assumptions that there is not careful planning or conversation about the future. I know the sitting mayor has a pretty positive plan for the future of East Cleveland. I would hope that there is a non-political conversation about the future of East Cleveland, that there are some young folks that are ready to step into a leadership role, be it on the city council or any number of ways that one could lead, because it's not always about political office, but certainly a collective conversation and commitment about the future of the city, and some support so that conversation becomes more than a conversation. I am so excited that East Cleveland is now involved with neighborhood connections, that folks that have reached in their pockets and volunteered and done everything that they could do to do community projects now have access to dollars that will support their work. Those individuals who have gotten those grants should be connected to each other and should be in dialogue about how do we support each other, how do we sustain our work, because I don't want the dollars to go away, but the reality is sometimes they do. So how do we build some synergy around younger leadership that are not political, folks who get neighborhood connection grants, folks that are tied to this work at CASE, people that are really doing some marvelous things that are not political, So maybe the time that is spent with them and planning can be shared with those who are in office, and there's some wisdom laid down about how we let the positive things lead, and we use our political relationships to make it happen, instead of using the political relationships to open doors that it never does. So
how have surrounding institutions and cities impacted East Cleveland?
I've always witnessed the study and involvement of the universities, and not just CASE, but Cleveland State as well. Dr. Norm Krumholz, he's still, I believe he is still working with the committee around economic development in East Cleveland. I haven't been able to continue to be involved, but I know that there's a real effort to work with the city, RTA. There are ways to get things done, and I don't want to pretend to say I know what's going on because I don't live in the city anymore. But as now an outsider looking in, obviously there are some ways, positive ways, that stakeholders outside the city of East Cleveland can impact that community. We have tracts of land where small industry can come in and build. You know, if the county would say, you know, we've got this land over here on Noble Road, you know, that you can build on, that's how you do that. So whether that's going to happen or not is a different story. But
how do you balance that with the threat of gentrification?
It depends on what your commitment is. If you're committed to mixed income, then you work to mix the income. But anytime you're driving out all the poor people, or where people have to be relocated to build high income only housing, or your rehab efforts is only focused on higher income, we gotta have families that move in to East Cleveland that have disposable income that can help sustain the tax base. But it's immoral to not provide housing for all levels of income, to provide jobs for all levels of folk. I just think it's about mixed income. which we've always had. It's always been that way. So the gentrification, though, says that we've got to eliminate. And I'm not saying, I'm just saying that we have to provide opportunity for everybody.
So what about the surrounding cities, Cleveland, Cleveland Heights? How have they impacted East Cleveland?
There, over the years, and I can remember very clearly, the importance of agreement on how we do things because, you know, East Cleveland's not a little island. They're touched by several wards in the city of Cleveland, Cleveland Heights, and one section of the city, I think it's not Euclid. It probably is Cleveland Heights too, but my point is agreement about safety, aesthetics, quality of our roads, our sewers, all of that, the infrastructure, and just how we plan. And countless meetings I attended with colleagues from other communities that touched East Cleveland, so we'd have some agreement. I don't know where that is right now, quite honestly.
Did you ever hear the story about the police in Cleveland Heights taking people, like picking people up and then dumping them in East Cleveland? Like people that were vagrant or drunken disorderly? No.
You're kidding.
I don't know, I've heard that.
Wow. That's sad.
I can't speak to the truth of that.
Well, you know, now that we're talking about that, I was in conversation with the judge, and I am excited to see a younger judge that grew up in East Cleveland that's serving. And I had a real good conversation with him because his attention is on our young people, which it should be. The city of Lakewood has a really effective diversion program. Judge Dawson endeavors to divert our juveniles in East Cleveland from the system so that they can be worked with so that they're in a different place to keep them out of the system. Once a young person gets involved in the juvenile justice system, you know, a lot of times unless something happens and there's intervention, sometimes they end up in the adult system, they drop out of school, all kinds of things that happen. But my point is, the police have the power to make the difference for young people and adults in a community if they are closely connected to efforts that divert folks from the system. And at this point, we're talking about making sure when police pick up young people that they have an awareness that they can be diverted to a program where not that their consequences won't be dealt with, but so they won't become a part of the system. So they play a very important role in making sure that happens. And I don't know where the breakdown is, but he has not seen the young people he should see that get in trouble, because they're going to get in trouble, but to see them involved in some positive activity to prevent them from getting involved. So I'm hoping that effort will be, can't even think of the word, it will be intensified, yeah, so that they'll say, okay, this kid is acting up, but instead of taking him down to juvie, we're going to take him to the judge in East Cleveland. So.
And you kind of mentioned in passing how Cleveland Clinic is its own thing. How do you think Cleveland Clinic has affected East Cleveland?
If I understand correctly, the Stephanie Tubbs Jones Center is a Cleveland Clinic entity. I believe that Cleveland Clinic, they control. They're controlling as they're controlling a large part of University Circle, that their influence is in East Cleveland as well. So that could be good or bad. That could be very bad or very good, depending on who's at the table and depending on who's making the decisions. So there's a situation where an institution can become an asset or a deficiency. They add to the quality of life of the community, that's great. But if their interest is only gobbling up land and not supporting the healthcare needs of the residents, we have a problem.
How familiar were you with the negotiations about Huron Road?
Not very, but I do understand that there were resources shared with the city because of the tearing down, which I thought was an atrocity, personally. The tearing down of the hospital, that the payroll costs, the payroll taxes that the city received from the employees that worked at the hospital, that was a loss. That was a loss. I don't know how many employees are at the health center, but for so many years, the hospital supported a lot of things in East Cleveland beyond health care, just being a institutional partner. So, yeah, I would hope that the health center is able to step into that role.
So I know you're not there any longer, but what is your vision for a future East Cleveland? Can you tell me about major issues that need to be addressed in order to better the community and the city?
I don't know what you do about transient populations. When people don't have a lot of money, they tend to move. I just believe that core issues of housing, employment, and entrepreneurship would be high on the priority list for East Cleveland to stabilize. That there is a closer relationship with the school district, the government, GE, which is still there, so that opportunities are greater for the young people. Actually, the second year STEM students attend, STEM is actually at Neela Park in East Cleveland. The housing in Forest Hills, beautiful, that folks move into that housing. The housing that is no longer being used, that is torn down. Some of the things that I've heard Mayor Norton talk about in terms of rehab and attracting families, I hope that happens. But it really requires new leadership. And I would hope that new leaders are cultivated, because you won't have them unless you cultivate them. And it's not just to be a mayor or a city council person, that there are churches and businesses and schools and the library and all kinds of stakeholders that would benefit from cultivated leadership. So I would hope that that would happen too.
So where are you living now?
In Slavic Village.
Okay. So can we talk about what you're doing to better your neighborhood, your community, and your city?
I moved to Slavic Village because my church 2 years ago acquired a Catholic campus that we transformed into the new home for Elizabeth Baptist Church. Um, we have adopted Willow School. Um, I do serve in a leadership role at my church.
So which church is this? Which church?
Elizabeth Baptist Church. Actually, the building that we are sitting in, where the Institute is located, is also part of Slavic Village. Um, the Development Corporation has done a great job of making available opportunities for the residents to keep their street clean, to have street clubs, to have gardens. The relationship building here is healthy. Not to say that crime does not exist here, that there are not housing challenges, because the foreclosure rate has been very high. There's a lot of homes here that need to be demolished. A lot of people aren't working. There is criminal activity here. But what I appreciate is the infrastructure of people and relationships and opportunities so that folks know that they have an option. It is a very integrated neighborhood. It looks like the West Side. You see all generations, all colors, all kinds of folks live here. There seems to be more of, there's not so much, there's more equity in terms of the income, housing stock, appreciation for green space. The business community is still pretty thriving. They've lost a lot too, but there's still a thriving business, Broadway and on Fleet. So it's interesting. I like it. It reminds me of East Cleveland when I was a kid, to be honest with you. Very much like when I was a kid. Mm-hmm.
What do you think happened differently here? Like if Slavic Village and East Cleveland were kind of on similar trajectories, what do you think happened differently here than happened in East Cleveland?
Privilege. Even with being a working class neighborhood, that there were still white people that were here holding it down, and that there was communication. East Cleveland even lost its newspaper and never got it back. Communication is powerful. So the Development Corporation plays a very pivotal role. Third Federal Savings, they have not only the bank itself is an institution, they have a foundation that is very involved with the schools and the youth here. It's investment in privilege. That's what I would say. It's a difference.
So I have a final question about East Cleveland, but then I have further questions for you specifically.
Okay.
What would you be prepared to do to participate in making East Cleveland better?
I am prepared to work with young leadership to share what I've learned, the mistakes that I've made, my vision, my energy with young leadership to hopefully influence a spirit of connection and collectivity that is beyond politics.
So, can you tell me a little bit about your work here at the Neighborhood Leadership Institute?
Mm-hmm. For the last 19 years, I've worked with a program called Neighborhood Leadership Cleveland, where we have identified and engaged grassroots leaders throughout Greater Cleveland in a curriculum that was developed jointly with the College of Urban Affairs and originally with Neighborhood Centers Association. That's who I started working with in 1994. The curriculum speaks to the strengths and gifts and talents of grassroots leaders. It provides them with tools, networking opportunity, decision-making exercises, and fun and fellowship, so that when they leave that experience, they will return to their communities renewed and inspired to do their leadership journey in a different way. There have been other leadership opportunities and facilitation that I've done with the Institute, so many that I'm grateful. Currently, I'm looking at transitioning my work into more of a consultant role. I've been doing this a long time. I was 38 years old when I started with Neighborhood Leadership Cleveland and Neighborhood Centers. The Institute was established 10 years ago, and it is flourishing. We have a group of young people who have come on board that are energetic. We're focusing a lot on community school movement, building relationships between stakeholders in the community and the schools, strengthening our young leaders with the tools that they need, public speaking, understanding of the civic environment, so that they are prepared to be adult leaders and step into decision-making roles. We've had the opportunity to work with Summit County to help them establish their own leadership program, and we're in talks now with Mahoning Valley to get them started. So in fact, we were in Warren yesterday. So I'm looking forward to that kind of work. I am very much committed to working with the faith community. And it's the same thing. How do you harvest leadership that will connect with the schools, the businesses, and the stakeholders? So it's just not the folks from on high that are making decisions, but that people in community are making decisions together, and they're building connections and programs and projects that they believe in and are committed to. But folks gotta know they can do that, and they gotta get to know each other. And there's an opportunity to do that, so that's what I'm looking forward to doing. I published a book of poetry 2 years ago, and I have not spent a lot of time with that book. I'm grateful and honored that Cleveland Public Library bought it last year, and East Cleveland Library did the same. In fact, East Cleveland Library reached out to me in a special way, did a big book signing in Black History Month, and there are 4 copies of the book on their shelf now. That was really exciting. That was really, really exciting. So a second book of poetry sometime soon about Cleveland and leadership and the things that I've observed. But you gotta kind of be away from the noise of it all to even reflect and to write. So I'm hoping to find some of that time too. Yes.
So what do you think the role of the arts is in social justice?
Oh, the arts, they're the eyes and the ears and the mouth and the feet and the beat and the sound of it all. That's how the word gets out, whether it's on the canvas or we hear it, or we see it, that's how the word gets out. Art is a reflection of life. And if we can see something that's reflective of what we know in our spirit, but the arts has such a special way of expressing it, we're all the better. Over the years, there have been tremendous artists, whether they're poets or painters or musicians, that have used various arts medium to express humanity and the right to be human, and the pain of being human, and how Langston Hughes is probably my all-time favorite, because he took on some really tough issues. There's one poem that he wrote about, he wrote to a bigot. And I can't remember when he wrote it, if he wrote it in the 50s or the 60s, but he said to the bigot that your hour is a stone, but my moment is a flower. To give us all an understanding that as a human being that desires to be treated equally, that's beautiful and fragile, as a flower is. So I encourage the arts for anybody. You'll see little kids paint and draw and write things that reflect their life's experience. And it could be any number of things. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of the arts. Big proponent.
And finally, I want to circle back to, obviously your garden was very important to you as a child. How do you see, in the course of the interviews, I've seen a lot of people talk about gardens. What do you see the potential for gardens to do for a community?
It's a gathering place. It's a place where we can all be equal, where we can all put our hands and our feet and our energy together to obviously plant something that we all nurture together and we watch grow. When something goes wrong, like it's too many weeds or it gets dry, that we're paying attention to it, and that when it grows, we celebrate, and when there's a harvest, we celebrate, and when it's time for it to be dormant, that we take care of it in that dormant state, and that it attracts people that might need to eat, and attracts people that might need to share. So a garden is a wonderful way. But you know, it's funny, some folks, they don't have a clue. They'll walk past and they don't understand. That's where food comes from. That's where flowers come from. We've gone so far away from nature that it's just a wonderful time to return our focus and energy around the sky and the earth and the soil and the sun. We think it's just about us. And it's not. So yeah, even some years ago, Krista Paul, who has retired as co-director for the Earth Day Coalition, she and I had lunch together a couple years ago, and we were talking about foreclosure and the demolition of houses and all this vacant land. It's like, wow, wouldn't it be nice that that land would turn into green space, native plants, grass, all kinds of things could grow, so it's just not this ugly, empty place. Now there's a program called Naturehood. And on the west side and the east side, there are efforts of residents to plant native plants and all kinds of wonderful things. The grass that'll just grow, or the low mow grass, it depends on the residents, what they want to do, so that it's not so ugly and dry looking. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a garden, but it certainly should be green. Mm-hmm.
So at this point, is there anything else that you would like to say as far as anything that we've talked about or anything you want to leave as a legacy?
Wow. I really have to say that this has been a powerful experience. I appreciate sharing my thoughts and memories. I never thought I would do this. I do want to share and leave a poem that I wrote, if I can. And I continue to write, but this is one that everybody, I don't care, male, female, black, white, educated, not so, they just love it. And I'm happy that it attracts people and everybody kind of gets something out of it. I know I did. So if I can collect myself, I like to share in the light. We are journey renewed. We are traveling wise and wonderful, spirit-filled and glowing, facing darkness and lifting light. Gentle spirit, all-knowing, gives us 1/10 showing at a time. Don't forget the mission, traveler. No omission of lessons learned. Practice and teach. Inspire and preach. Drop the pretense. Times are intense. Wrap love around words. Take a journey. Flow through trouble. Flow history through darkness. Flow knowledge into the light. Take a journey. Sing sorrow soothing. Choose words building. Don't forget the mission, traveler. No omission of lessons learned. Practice and teach. Inspire and preach. Drop the pretense. Times are intense. Wrap love around words. Take a journey. Flow through trouble. Flow history through darkness. Flow knowledge into the light. Take a journey. Sing sorrow soothing. Choose words building. Don't forget the lesson, traveler. Surrender control. God's roadmap unfolds. Take a journey. Thanks. I really messed that up. I repeated it a couple of times, but it was something about doing that. That was weird.
I got chills.
I know. I did too, because the words just kept coming back to me. Wow.
I mean, we can re-record if you want to do it.
Wow. It has never, ever happened. It's like, though, they just kept coming back. Wow. Maybe because I did this. Huh.
I think it was awesome.
So you want me to re-record it?
It's up to you.
That was good? Yeah. I've never done that poem like that before.
And your face was just beatific.
Wow. Okay. That's a nice word.